microphone. Okay, welcome back on our second day. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the day, Alix Cohen, who joined Notre Dame's philosophy department last year, but it's also my special pleasure because we go back a long way until my early days in Cambridge. So she was one of the first Kantians I met in my life, and so I'm very pleased to introduce you here. And Alix is an expert on many things within and beyond Kant. In Kant, she works on anthropology and biology, normativity, epistemic normativity, emotions, and many other things. But she is also a world expert on the third critique, Kant's critique of the power of judgment. And today she will speak, I think, on a topic that is closely related to the third critique, namely on Kant, on the feeling of life in aesthetics and beyond. So,
Thank you
welcome.
so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for the kind welcome. And I want to special shout out to all my new colleagues in Notre Dame because they've made the move, which was a massive move for me, very, very pleasant and kind of seamless. So yeah, I'm very grateful to be part of this really lively and wonderful history of philosophy community. So yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so yeah, today I'm going to talk about Kant and I'm going to talk about beauty. So the way I was thinking about this paper when Katerina and Stephen told me about the topic of the conference was so the life of the mind. I was thinking, well, what is the right model to think about the... Oh, sorry, do you want me to be closer? Sorry. I hate those things. Sorry. So yeah, what is the right model to think about the Kantian mind? And I'd never really thought about it in those terms. And so I wasn't quite sure where to start. And then my kind of intuition was that there was something about the experience of beauty on Kant's account that would give us particular insights into the life of the mind. And so that was kind of my way in the conference. And then I started thinking about, well, because for Kant, beauty animates our faculties in a specific way, in a free, harmonious way. That's how he defines beauty, as a free play. It's a kind of canonical, infamous thing, because no one really knows what that means. But I said, well, this notion of animation, there's something about kind of life in there that might help us think through the Kantian faculties. So with this starting point, then I looked at the text and thought, okay, well, what do we have here? And of course, the term life doesn't appear that much in the first part of the third critique, which is on aesthetics, but it does occur in the context of what Kant talks the feeling of the promotion of life. And so the claim that is the starting point of my talk is Kant's claim in the third critique that the beautiful, so that's on your hand now, the beautiful directly brings with it a feeling of the promotion of life. And when he makes that claim, he contrasts it with the experience of the sublime, which on his account only brings pleasure indirectly. And the reason why the pleasure is indirect in the case of the sublime is because it starts with pain. So for those of you're kind of faced with kind of danger or something huge and humongous that kind of threatens either the imagination or your sensible nature. But either way, it starts with pain, and then the pleasure follows from the pain in some way or another. So the contrast is between the experience of the beautiful, where pleasure is direct and life feels promoted somehow, versus the sublime, where the pleasure is indirect and life is, I guess, somehow threatened or undermined or hindered at first. So then my question is, well, how do we understand the feeling of the promotion of life? What is promoted in the experience of beauty? And so my next step was to look at Kant's definition of feeling, and in particular Kant's definition of pleasure. So I give it to you from the second critique, where Kant defines pleasure as the representation of the agreement of an object or an action with the subjective conditions of life. So we have life here, and the thought being that when I feel pleasure, what I'm aware of is that whatever affects me, so an object, an activity, agrees with me, in the sense that perhaps it furthers my ends, it fulfills a desire I have, it sustains my activity in some way or another, it furthers an interest I have. So it's this kind of very, I call it cognitive conception of life, in the sense that life is identified with some kind of capacity to desire or to will or to have an interest in, this kind of drive. And that's a very, I mean, not many Kantians have thought about life in Kant, but the few who have tend to use this cognitive model of life. So life is desire, life is connected to the capacity to will, the faculty of desire. And I guess part of my talk will, or maybe an implication of my talk will be to push back against this cognitive model, because I think it's too narrow. And so I will try to put forward a kind of broader notion of life, the life of the mind in Kant, as a kind of dynamic power to act. But I'll get to that towards the end. Anyway, the puzzle I want to start with is this thought that, on the one hand, pleasure has this kind of cognitive dimension, where it is the attainment of an end, or it's the fulfillment of a desire. But on the other hand, Kant defines beauty as the very opposite of that, in the sense that beauty for Kant is considered, it's disinterested, it's often, one way of cashing it out. It's the beautiful object is not considered with respect to its end or its function or its use for the subject. So it's meant to be this kind of the opposite of the attainment of an end. The beautiful object doesn't fulfill any of my ends, it's just kind of there. And so then the question is, well, how do we understand beauty as promoting life, as fulfilling an end or a desire or an interest, if beauty in itself is an experience of something that is disinterested? It's a disinterested experience. So it seems that we have a kind of tension here, because in the experience of beauty, the feeling of the promotion of life, by definition, can't be a pleasure at the attainment or the fulfillment of an end. So the question then is, well, what is being promoted in the experience of beauty if it can't be an end? And the kind of overwhelming answer in the literature, as far as I can tell, is that the experience of beauty promotes cognition in some way or other. So the thought is, and actually, I won't tell you what the thought is because I'll develop it in the core of the paper. So that's kind of the overwhelming answer. And I will push back against this answer because I think it's just a wrong way of understanding the experience of beauty in Kant. And so I will put forward, a kind of different model, but which hopefully will make sense as it unfolds. Because I know I don't have much time, so I want to get started. Okay, so what I want to begin with in the first section is to kind of look at what's out there in terms of promotion of life and cognition, and explain to you very briefly why I think it doesn't quite work. So the thought is, the strategy is, the experience of beauty is a promotion of life because it promotes cognition in one way or another. And then people have come up with various ways in which it promotes cognition. So one of them, so interpretation one, is Gaia's. So he says the harmony between imagination and understanding is the attainment or fulfillment of an objective. So the thought is, and again, this needs a lot of, to actually understand what this means needs a lot of kind of Kantian jargon, but I don't think we really need it at this point, or at least I'm hoping we don't need it. The point being simply that cognition for Kant is kind of, requires as this condition grasping a manifold in some kind of unity, so that then we can apply concepts to it and understand it and judge it and so on. And so the thought is, in the free play of imagination and understanding, in the experience of beauty, we grasp the manifold in some kind of unity. And so in that sense, the free play in the experience of beauty is a cognitive achievement. Of course, it falls short of cognition in the sense that when we experience a beautiful object, we don't cognize its beauty, or we don't cognize, it's not a cognitive experience, but it meets certain conditions of cognition or preconditions of cognition. And so in that respect, it's a cognitive achievement. And so life is promoted and the experience is pleasurable because it meets this kind of cognitive condition. So it achieves a cognitive end, although it's not the end of cognition itself as a whole. So that's the first way of cashing it out. And so the problem with that kind of interpretation is, of course, and Gaia acknowledged it himself. I was talking to him just recently, kind of trying to push him and be like, but don't you think it's a problem that, it seems to make beauty very, like the achievement of cognitive interest. And so how is it different from cognition then? It is just a failure of cognition. And, it seems that it seems weird to kind of characterize Kant's experience of beauty as a failure of cognition. It seems that you'd want some kind of positive, pleasurable thing that is special about beauty, as opposed to a kind of, oh, I have beauty because I can't quite cognize. Or, it seems like it's kind of the wrong way of thinking about beauty. So people have tried different kinds of ways around this problem. So we have, for instance, Samantha Mathern recently in her book, who tries to define the experience of beauty as through imaginative engagement with the object, we kind of spurred in new cognitive directions. So we have this kind of imaginative richness of the engagement with the object. And it's pleasurable because, again, it accomplishes one of the ends of cognition, not all of them, what she calls exhibition. So she focuses on a different aspect of Kant's cognitive account of cognition. And she says, well, the end that is met there is that of making sensible an idea or a concept, which is what Kant calls exhibition. And so again, we have the same problem, that it is somehow, beauty is defined as the accomplishment of a cognitive end. And this seems similarly in tension with Kant's claim that beauty has to be somehow disinterested, and thus not fulfill any end whatsoever. Okay, and the third way of pushing this line again is the thought that in this case it's not. So that's Engela Breitenbach. What does she say? Beauty contributes. Yes, so she focuses on the imaginative reflection, emphasizing. I mean, I guess like Samantha, she emphasizes the work of the imagination, but I think she ties the connection not so much with the name of cognition, but rather the idea that in the imaginative reflection on the beautiful object, we are engaged in a process that contributes to cognition in some sense, insofar as when we reflect on, say, a play or or a painting, we're doing the same thing as we're doing when we engage in scientific investigation. And so she says, when she often takes the example of actual scientists who describe their practice in terms of, playing with concepts and playing with theories and finding beauty in there, and then somehow the imaginative engagement in beauty is the same as the imaginative engagement with scientific theories, and is fruitful because it drives your scientific inquiry forward, because it gives you new ideas. So her emphasis is slightly different from Mathern in the sense that instead of realizing a kind of step of cognition, it contributes to the cognitive endeavor more generally. So it's a slightly different account. And I think the problem with Breitenbach's view is that then I think it becomes very hard to distinguish between the imaginative reflection at play in beauty, and which is supposed to be playful and pleasurable and engaging in all sorts of ways, and what I call, ironically, but I mean, it meant to be facetious, but maybe not, the kind of more boring scientific engagement with, the object. So of course, when you reflect on a scientific theory, I mean, not that I would know, but I presume that it's not always pleasurable and fun and engaging. And so the problem is, well, how do you cash out the difference? If they're actually meant to be the same, then why would, sometimes it seems pleasurable and fun, and other times it's not. It seems that you need a kind of account for that. Anyway. I'm aware this is kind of very quick, but this is to kind of give you a sense of all the options available out there to think about beauty as a promotion of life, in the sense that it realizes some cognitive ends or interests. And so in that sense, it fits with the more cognitive definition of life, because in that case, we have the attainment of an end, or something like that, or an interest, and so it seems to fit this kind of very straightforward model. It's just that it's a cognitive end that beauty contributes to. Okay, so trying to push back on this kind of model, one thought is to, instead of focusing on the connection between the experience of beauty and cognition, I thought we should focus on the very process at play in the harmonious free play of imagination and understanding in the experience of beauty. So that's what I do in the second part. And so it's focusing on the claim that when our cognitive faculties are engaged in the free play for Kant, this very free play animates our cognitive faculties. So I've given you a bunch of passages from the third critique where this is suggested. So talking about the facilitated play of the powers of the mind, which are enlivened, belipten, through mutual agreement. So we find this kind of vocabulary throughout the third critique. And so how are we to kind of understand this notion of animation? It's a very, very tricky notion. And actually, there isn't much work on it for some reason. So one way of understanding this kind of animation and trying to fit it within a story about promotion, what is being promoted in the experience of beauty. Well, one way is to say what is promoted in the free play is just our cognitive faculties. So we have cognitive faculties engaged in this kind of slight unique interaction in aesthetic experience. The faculties are being animated in some special way. Well, then what is being promoted is just the faculties. That's, they're enhanced, they're kind of animated, so that's promoted. That's kind of what Allison says in his book. But the problem is that I find it very hard to make sense of the idea that a capacity could be promoted. I mean, it seems, especially on the Kantian view of power capacity, a capacity is a capacity, and then it is what it is. But how could you promote? I mean, I don't know. It just seemed weird to me, the idea. But maybe you're not sharing my thought. But I just my intuition was more that a more promising line would be to say, well, what is promoted is the way we exercise the capacity. So we exercise it well or not, and what's promoted is the exercise of the capacity as it's being exercised. And this is kind of suggested by a number of passages, which I put on the handout. And so the thought is, in the experience of beauty, which is an experience of aesthetic reflection where, imagination and understanding are in free play, the exercise is being promoted in the sense that the animation of the faculty itself makes the faculties keep on going in this particular animated way. So the thought is that what the animation promotes is the activity itself as it's being engaged, as the faculties are engaged with each other, right? So that would be a kind of form of promotion of the exercise of these faculties, because it's the experience just keeps on going, which is a feature of the experience of beauty for Kant. So that's one way of thinking about it. Well, the problem with that kind of model, again, is that it's unclear that this is actually a case of promotion, because it just seems that what's happening is the very same activity just keeps on going, but there's no kind of nothing being furthered or in any different way. I mean, it's just the same thing going and going and going and going. And so it seemed to me that it doesn't really capture what the term promotion is meant to capture. So I thought that was an issue with that way of thinking about it. So another way of going about it is to say, okay, well, what's being promoted is not the very exercise of the capacities there and then, but the way we exercise these capacities in general. And that's something that I have defended in the past with a friend of mine, Yoon Choi. So what we've argued is that when we experience beauty, and thus the free play, what is being promoted is sorry, you know what, let me quote us, because it's probably, so we say, the harmonious free play of imagination and understanding is an activity that is cognitively enhancing, and so the experience of beauty leaves us keener and abler users of our cognitive capacities. So the thought that what is being promoted is not a kind of instance of exercise of these capacities, but rather the kind of overall way in which we will exercise those capacities, I guess, in the future or in general. And so, well, obviously, I used to think that was a good way of thinking about it since I wrote it. But it seems to me that one problem with this kind of view is that what ends up being promoted is actually external to the experience of beauty itself. So the thought being that beauty promotes a certain exercise of our cognitive faculties, but yeah, I guess this in the future. So it's not part of the experience of beauty itself. And the problem with that is that Kant is very clear that the beautiful directly brings with it a feeling of the promotion of life. So the thought is that the promotion needs to be internal to the experience of beauty itself. I mean, that's just what the text says. I think there are other reasons, more philosophical reasons, to be worried about this. And the reason is the following. So if you have an experience of the free play, which is an experience of beauty, and therefore an experience an affective experience that Kant calls the feeling of aesthetic pleasure or the feeling of the beautiful. So this is going on, but then how does this feeling of the beautiful relate to the promotion of life? And so it seems that we end up with two feelings. So we have on the one hand the feeling of the beautiful, which manifests the free play of the cognitive faculties, and on the other hand, insofar as this free play promotes the way we exercise our cognitive faculties, then this promotion, which, as I said, is distinct from the free play itself, gives rise to a feeling of the promotion of life. And so we have two feelings, the feeling of beauty and the feeling of the promotion of life. And that seems, well, I mean, I guess you could say that's what it is. But I just don't think that's what Kant says, first because of the passage, and second because, yeah, it seems too many feelings. It seems unnecessary. Okay, and so then it feels like we need to go back again, sadly, to the experience of beauty and try to account for a promotion that is somehow internal to the experience of beauty itself. And so that's what I try to do in the final section, which is my new strategy. I'm not sure it works, but let's try. So the thought is, again, to kind of go back to the idea of the mind as alive and try to see whether I can get something out of that works. And so the thought is, if you think of the Kantian mind as not as a kind of a static, structure with different faculties that just kind of do, what they do, but thinking of the mind as a kind of dynamic power that is alive insofar as it's active, insofar as it does things as a kind of organic whole, I guess, in a way. I mean, Katerina was trying to think about, what kind of model do we use to think about the mind? And I guess the model I'm trying to think about here is something like an organic model of powers that function where the parts are kind of somehow determined by the idea of the whole, which, is something that Katerina has worked on. So the thought is, if we start thinking of the mind in this way, then one of the implications of this model is that in order for the mind to work, it seems that it seems that a condition of its activity is that the activity of its various parts function harmoniously. So the thought is each faculty is kind of driven by its own inner principle. I mean, that's a kind of Kantian jargon, which you don't necessarily need to worry about, although maybe you should worry about it. But the thought is that, so you have all these capacities that function according to their own principles, and that somehow for the mind as a whole to be a power that is able to act at all, it seems it requires some kind of harmony between all those activities. And so what it means is that any impact on the mind will affect it in a way that either hinders or furthers its activity. So the thought is that there's no neutral impact. Whatever it is that, in the way the Kantian mind is always affected because we're embodied and our own activity affects itself and so on and so forth, any impact becomes either a furtherance or a hindrance of whatever it's doing. And so what it means is that on this picture, whatever affects the mind is going to be generating either a harmonious activity between its faculty or a disharmonious one, because that's what being hindered or furthered turns out to be in this kind of picture. Either it's working smoothly and acting, or it's being hindered and therefore, I mean, not that it stops acting, but it's just not acting as smoothly because we have some disharmony between, say, interests or or ends on principles or something like that. And so, kind of zeroing on this notion of harmony, I think we can think about it in two kinds of ways. So on the cognitive model that I hinted at the beginning of the paper, the thought is that life is promoted insofar as there's this kind of what I call passive harmony, but I mean it's not a great way of putting it, but hopefully you can make sense of it in the following way. So if you think about an object that fulfills some kind of desire, you have. I mean, obviously take a very simple model of that kind of thing. So when an object fulfills a desire, the object is somehow in agreement with that desire. I mean, think back to Kant's definition of pleasure as agreement at the beginning of the paper. So the object fulfills the desire, and it enables the success of my activity of desiring. So because it fulfills a need or a desire, or something like that. And but the way it fulfills this activity is by ending it. Because of course, once your desire is fulfilled, you stop desiring. Or there's a new desire, but the activity of desiring stops. This particular activity of desiring stops. And so that's a kind of cognitive model of thinking about it. But if you think about the case of beauty as a different model of harmony and activity, then what you see is that the experience of beauty is an experience of life being promoted insofar as the harmony between the object and the mind is an active one. Because what the object generates or triggers as it affects the mind is an activity, and not just any old activity, but a harmonious activity between its cognitive faculties. And so, why is that interesting? Well, I think it's interesting because it shows that that the cognitive model is not wrong, but it's too limited because it portrays life as, we have these kind of needs and interests, and when they're met, great, harmony. When they're not met, not great, frustration. Yeah, as I say, it's a very passive model of the mind. Whereas if you take the case of beauty as your model for thinking about life, then what you realize is that what is being furthered or hindered is the mind's activity as such, because it keeps on, so it generates an activity, and then of course the activity keeps on going or not, but in a way it doesn't matter. The point is that the object triggers this activity, and this activity is harmonious, and therefore it promotes the activity of the life of the mind in general, is the thought, because it generates more harmony, more active harmony, or more harmonious activity. Anyway, yeah, I'm running out of time, so I will just conclude by saying that what this means for our understanding of what is the feeling of the promotion of life in Kant's account of beauty? Well, on my reading, we end up with just one feeling. So the feeling of beautiful just is a feeling of the promotion of life. Why? Well, because it is the free play itself, insofar as it is a harmonious interaction between our cognitive faculties. It is in this respect that life is promoted thereby, so we don't have like anything outside of the experience of beauty. It's just the free play itself is a promotion of life insofar as it is a harmonious activity between our faculties. And so that's the model of life that I want to put forward. And then in conclusion, I had a few thoughts, but I mean, about the idea of feeling of life. So I think on this model, what it means is that, there's no such thing as feeling life for Kant. I think what there is feeling life as promoted or hindered. It's always valence. There's no life outside, there's no life beyond activity going well or not, depending on, yeah. And the final point, I guess, is kind of going back to the unique feature of the experience of beauty for Kant, and why I think it's a fruitful model to think about the life of the mind in general. And the reason is that it has this kind of unique feature of passivity, insofar as the experience of beauty is an experience of being affected by an object or a presentation, but it also has this dimension of activity, because what the affection triggers in the subject is an activity that is harmonious. And so it has this kind of twofold dimension, which I found particularly fruitful for thinking about the life of the mind. Anyway, I'll stop here. Thank you so much.